I was having coffee recently with a friend of mine. She's, smart, successful, modest. I mean, pretty much the textbook definition of a good woman.
Okay.
And she was venting about this date she'd just been on with a guy she considered like top tier.
Mm-hmm.
She told me, and she had this look of just absolute certainty that she had completely nailed it.
She was confident.
Oh, completely.
Yeah.
She explained how she sat down and immediately laid all her cards on the table. She told him exactly what she wanted, serious commitment, marriage, a specific timeline, the whole package.
Oh, right out of the gate.
Right out of the gate.
Yeah.
She was so convinced that by presenting herself as this wholesome, no-nonsense wife material, she was efficiently filtering out all the time wasters.
I can see the logic from a certain point of view. It's an efficiency model.
Exactly. But then the confusion set in. She's just staring at her phone, waiting for a text that just isn't coming.
Oh.
The guy had completely checked out, gone. And she couldn't wrap her head around it. She just kept saying, I did everything right. I showed him I'm not like those other girls.
And that phrase right there, not like those other girls, is so telling, isn't it?
It is. What struck me wasn't just, her disappointment, but her total misunderstanding of the dynamic she was in. She was so busy projecting this static image of what she thought a man wants long term, she completely ignored the actual psychology of attraction.
She was playing a role, not being a person.
Yes. She didn't realize that by forcing the pace and acting out this script of perfection, she didn't look high value. To him, she probably looked desperate.
Yeah.
Just made me realize this is exactly where so many decent, well-intentioned women go wrong.
That story, it perfectly frames the conflict we're going to be diving into today.
It really does.
We're navigating this core tension between strategic self-presentation, the idea that you have to play a role or a game to get a partner, versus the profound power of authenticity.
Right. So are things like transparency and honesty just, feel-good ideals? Or are they something more?
That's the core question. Are they measurable, adaptive, long-term mating strategies that actually signal real partner value? We're going to unpack how authenticity drives, just better relationship outcomes.
And how our social world, our context, kind of dictates whether we even feel safe enough to be genuine in the first place.
Exactly. And then we'll zoom out and look at these massive sociological shifts like evolving gender roles and this huge acceleration of repartnering, and how all of that just complicates the whole quest for commitment.
Okay, let's unpack this. We're starting right in the messy trenches of dating psychology.
Yeah.
The conventional wisdom, which my friend was clearly following, is that to be pursued, you have to appear a little bit unattainable, mysterious, perfect.
The game.
The game. But what if that whole playbook is just attracting the wrong kind of person? What does the research actually say defines success in long-term relationships?
Well, the research gives a very clear and I think nuanced answer, and it starts by defining what authenticity truly is in a relationship context. It's more than just the bumper sticker slogan, just be yourself.
Right.
Researchers use this tool. It's called the Authenticity in Relationship Scale, or AIRS, and they use it to break the concept down into two measurable and predictive subscales. These aren't just personality quirks. They are like strategic orientations toward partnership.
Okay, so what are those two core orientations? What does authenticity actually look like in practice?
So the first one is the unacceptability of deception, or UOD.
UOD?
This is a person's fundamental unwillingness to be deceitful, even when they know that being honest might cost them something.
Even if it might lead to rejection.
Exactly. Think of it as this, like internal commitment to the truth, regardless of the immediate negative consequences, like admitting a flaw or talking about an inconvenient truth from your past, even if you suspect it might turn a potential partner off.
Okay, so UOD is about integrity under pressure. But integrity alone doesn't build a connection, does it? You have to actually, open up.
That's the other half of the equation. That's where the second subscale comes in. Intimate risk-taking, or IRT.
IR2.
And this measures an individual's willingness to make themselves emotionally vulnerable in their intimate relationships. This is the courage, really, to express deep feelings, needs, and yes, even your deep-seated flaws.
All while knowing that this exposure carries a huge risk of rejection or even, ridicule.
Precisely. So these two things, UOD and IRT, that's the research definition of successful, high-value authenticity. It isn't about being flawless. It's about being fearless and showing who you currently are, warts and all.
So the researchers' core assumption was basically a showdown.
A showdown is a good way to put it. The idea was, if all the common deception and game playing we see facilitates short-term dating and casual flings, then the opposite, honesty and transparency or authenticity, must be what defines and predicts successful, high-quality, long-term relationships.
And the findings, I'm guessing they weren't subtle.
The findings, especially when you look at predicting successful outcomes, are impossible to ignore. When they examined established relationships, authenticity was linked with significantly positive results across the board.
How strong are we talking here? Because a lot of dating advice kind of dismisses concepts like authenticity as, soft, unmeasurable.
These are incredibly robust findings in social science. I mean, we're looking at a correlation of 0.43 with commitment to a romantic partner.
Okay, R equals 0.43.
And an even more substantial correlation of 0.53 with relationship satisfaction.
Wow, 0.53. Now, for those of us who aren't statisticians, put that in context. How big of a deal is that?
It's a massive deal. In this kind of research, correlations of 0.50 or higher are huge predictors. This tells you that authenticity isn't a minor factor. It is a central pillar that supports both stability and happiness in a relationship.
So if we unpack that R equals 0.53 correlation, what does that actually mean for a couple day to day? Why does being authentic create that much more satisfaction?
It fundamentally increases predictability, and it lowers what you could call relationship maintenance costs.
Maintenance costs, I like that.
Think about it. If your partner is high in UAD, you can trust what they say. You trust their intentions. If they're high in IRT, you know where you stand emotionally because they're willing to take the risk and share their feelings with you.
Which means you're not constantly second-guessing or playing detective, trying to decipher mixed signals.
Exactly. You eliminate all that emotional labor and that reliability, that predictability. It creates this deep sense of psychological safety. And that is the absolute bedrock of satisfaction.
It also suggests that authentic people are just, better built for stability in general.
Precisely. Authenticity is linked to key positive personality traits that are essential for stable pair bonding. Things like high emotional intelligence and, crucially, secure attachment styles.
Right.
And what's more, when researchers surveyed people who were actively looking for serious relationships, their definition of being yourself included really specific, transparent behaviors. Being honest, discussing the future, and yes, talking about marriage.
Okay, that connects right back to my friend's mistake, doesn't it?
Yeah.
She performed the act of discussing marriage, which sounds like a high IRT behavior.
On the surface, yes.
But her motivation wasn't genuine vulnerability. It was a strategic move. So it was actually a UOD failure, an attempt to filter while projecting this perfect image. The action was right, but the delivery and the context made it read as strategic, not sincere.
And the difference between transparency and desperation is all about context and internal consistency. If you signal availability and long-term interest, which are, by the way, high-value signals, but you're also faking perfection or playing other games, the signal gets mixed, it's scrambled.
And a high-value partner who is also authentic, who is high in UOD and IRT, is going to spot that inconsistency immediately.
And they will filter you out. Which brings us directly to the counter strategy, the one that's built entirely on inconsistency. Playing hard to get. PHTG.
PHTG, the classic advice.
It's the absolute antithesis of the authentic strategy. It's defined by the deliberate manipulation of your perceived availability and desirability. It's all about artificially boosting your perceived mate value.
So we're talking about all the classic behaviors. Sounding busy, limiting how fast you reply to texts, creating this artificial scarcity.
And showing initial enthusiasm only to pull back and feign disinterest later. It's a strategic deployment of mixed signals, specifically designed to elicit a chase response.
And I imagine the data shows a pretty stark opposition to authenticity.
It does. PHTG is negatively correlated with authenticity. It sits at a correlation of negative 0.40 for long-term use of the strategy. They are behaviorally polar opposites, but the most alarming finding is the pathology that's associated with PHTG.
You're talking about the Dark Triad of personality traits.
Yes. PHTG is positively associated with narcissism, Machiavellianism, and psychopathy. These are individuals who, they specialize in self-interest, manipulation, and a fundamental lack of empathy.
That is a profoundly concerning link. It means if you're using PHTG, even if you think of yourself as a decent person, you are performing the behavioral playbook of pathology.
And that behavior is directly linked to disastrous relational outcomes. Chronic lying, incredibly low commitment, and very high rates of infidelity. The research suggests a very clear functional split here.
Authenticity is for stability.
Authenticity is linked to a stable, monogamous, long-term mating strategy, whereas PHTG is tied very clearly to relational instability and pathology.
But let's talk about attraction itself. I mean, does the authentic person, the one who's thoughtful and easy to read, actually win the beauty contest? Doesn't the mysterious game player often generate more of that, immediate spark?
The research suggests that the desire for an authentic partner isn't just about long-term stability, it's also about immediate desirability, especially when you're looking through the lens of long-term potential.
So how did they test that?
They used vignette studies. They had participants read descriptions of two potential partners. One displayed being yourself behaviors, thoughtful, easy to read, open about their feelings. The other was the classic game player. Flirtatious, distracted, hard to get their attention.
And the result?
The authentic individual was rated as significantly more attractive and desirable as a partner. So people aren't just settling for the nice person, they are actively, immediately more attracted to the transparent one.
And I remember the data gets even more compelling when they were asked specifically about long-term potential.
Absolutely. It gets even stronger. Participants reported being able to see themselves in a serious, committed, long-term relationship with the authentic partner far more often.
How much more?
The correlation for long-term relationship potential was R equals 0.67.
0.6.
Think about that number. That is a massive preference. It demonstrates that the market, when it's assessing for long-term commitment, overwhelmingly values transparency and predictability over perceived scarcity and aloofness.
That should be the final nail in the coffin for any dating strategy built on faking unavailability. A 0.67 correlation means that if your goal is commitment, being genuinely open is one of the single most effective things you can do.
But the real filtration mechanism, and this is where it gets fascinating, is assortative mating, who is attracted to whom.
So, like attracts like.
In this case, yes. Authentic individuals actively filter out the game players, and the game players filter out the authentic ones.
How so?
This study specifically noted that authentic men showed a special antipathy towards women who displayed PHTG behavior.
Antipathy. A special antipathy. They were repelled by it.
Completely repelled. They didn't see the feigned disinterest as a fun challenge. They saw it as a massive red flag, a signal of instability, low UOD, and just high relational maintenance costs. They consciously filtered those women out.
So the game playing successfully repels the exact people you would want for a stable relationship, the high-value, secure partners.
And conversely, the men who scored high on traits like narcissism and psychopathy, they showed an increased attraction to the game-playing female partner.
Of course they did.
Why? Because the PHTG strategy, with its manipulation and mixed signals, it aligns perfectly with their own unstable, manipulative relationship strategy. The game players find each other.
It's an incredible paradox, isn't it? People use games to try and signal high value, but the behavior only attracts those who specialize in low commitment and high pathology.
While the behavior that people fear most, vulnerability and honesty, is the only signal that actually attracts a secure, committed partner.
And this brings us to the evolutionary interpretation, which frames authenticity as a costly signal of mate value.
Yes. Costly signaling theory. The idea dictates that if a trait is expensive or risky to display, that display is likely to be an honest one. And the question becomes, why is authenticity costly?
The cost is the intimate risk-taking, the IRT.
Exactly. Exposing your true emotional self, your needs, your flaws, it's highly vulnerable. If the potential partner rejects you, or worse, if they're a game player who takes advantage of your openness, the emotional cost is immediate and it can be devastating.
But because that display is so risky,
it becomes an honest indicator of something deeper.
Right.
The willingness to accept that emotional risk is an honest signal of your suitability for long-term pair bonding and high parental investment. It signals what's called a slow life history strategy, an orientation toward long-term stability, investment, and monogamy.
While the game player, by minimizing their risk and using manipulation, signals a fast strategy.
A fast strategy, a focus on short-term gains, low investment, and, potentially lower commitment and fidelity.
So the emotional intelligence and secure attachment you need to be authentic, those are actually signals that you're a reliable investment for a stable future.
Yes. And that is precisely why authentic individuals attract other authentic individuals. They recognize the value of low maintenance and high reliability, and they are willing to pay the cost of initial vulnerability to secure it.
Okay, so we've established that psychologically, honesty is the optimal long-term strategy. But if that's true, why is the instinct to play games so powerful? We need to shift from the strategic choice to the psychological motivation, which, as you mentioned earlier, is often rooted in just profound fear.
It is often fear, specifically rejection sensitivity or RSQ. For most people, game playing isn't a purely malicious calculation. It's a defensive adaptation. It's rooted in this deep-seated fear that if you reveal your genuine self, your messy, needy, flawed self, you will be rejected, and that rejection will be catastrophic.
It's a painful dynamic. I mean, if I use PHTG, I might lose the partner, but I protect my inner self, my core. If I use IRT and they reject, they're not just rejecting the character I was playing, they're rejecting me.
That's the core psychological burden. And the research really highlights just how volatile and reactive rejection-sensitive individuals are to their social environment. They are constantly scanning the horizon for signs of threat or safety.
How did the research measure that reactivity? Tell us about the experiment that kind of isolated this social context factor.
So researchers used priming techniques. They basically manipulated the perceived safety of self-expression. In one condition, participants were primed to feel unsafe. They read a little story, a vignette about how in the modern dating market, it's essential to act independent and self-sufficient to avoid appearing desperate and needy.
So it directly triggered that core fear of vulnerability.
Exactly. It triggered it in the rejection-sensitive individuals.
And what happened when that vulnerability was triggered?
Under that unsafe context, the rejection-sensitive individuals defaulted straight to PHTG. They became less available for a first date. They intentionally delayed responding to a text message. They deployed the defensive shield. The performance went up, authenticity went down.
So they fall back on the PHTG playbook, precisely because their emotional defense system is activated.
Exactly. But here's the critical insight. When the context was flipped, when participants were primed to feel safe to be themselves, the very same rejection-sensitive individuals behaved completely differently.
How so?
They were more likely to make themselves immediately available for a date. They responded quickly to texts. They started acting exactly like securely attached, authentic individuals.
That is fascinating.
Yeah.
It suggests that PHTG isn't a fixed pathological trait for everyone who uses it. For some, it's a situational defensive posture.
It is. If you can alleviate that perceived threat of rejection, these individuals are capable of and willing to engage in transparent dating behavior.
So we can conceptualize PHTG not just as a malicious strategy, but as a defensive adaptation deployed when someone perceives a high-risk environment for being themselves.
The behavior is defensive, not necessarily malicious. However, and this is a big however, we also have to recognize that for many people, PHTG is a stable, habitual personality feature.
And what does the full psychological profile of the habitual game players look like?
Well, PHTG tendencies were strongly correlated not only with high rejection sensitivity, but also with highly pathological and unstable traits. This includes both grandiose narcissism, entitlement, superiority, and vulnerable narcissism, which is more about insecurity and defensiveness.
And it also correlated with attachment styles, right?
It did. It correlated with all three categories of insecure attachment.
Let's break that down. What are the three insecure attachments, and how do they each lead to playing hard to get?
Okay, so first there's fearful attachment. This is where a person deeply desires closeness but is also terrified of it. This leads to that classic approach avoidance behavior, the push and pull of PHTG.
Okay, that makes sense. What's the second?
Preoccupied attachment. This is a person who craves constant validation. They often use games to elicit a desired response from their partner to get that chase, to validate their own worth.
And the third?
The third is dismissing attachment. This individual actively minimizes intimacy and emotional connection. They use PHTG, the feigned disinterest, the unavailability, to maintain emotional distance and preserve their autonomy. They see emotional intimacy as a threat or a trap.
And I'm guessing PHTG was negatively correlated with secure attachment.
Unsurprisingly, yes.
This gives us the ultimate psychological contrast then. Authenticity is rooted in security, emotional intelligence, and stability. PHTG, whether it's situational or habitual, is rooted in pervasive insecurity, fear, and pathological traits.
And this is why PHTG functions as such an effective filter for high-quality partners. The nonverbal signals of game playing correctly indicate a relationship strategy that's built on a foundation of instability.
Okay, so while individuals are grappling with this psychological paradox, this clash between needing to be authentic but being terrified of rejection, the very structures that govern commitment are shifting dramatically underneath our feet. We're moving now into the macro-level context, this evolving landscape of commitment.
Right. If you zoom out and look at the US and Europe, we see that the stability of unions has been decreasing significantly. The cultural ideal of marriage itself has undergone a profound transformation.
From the companionate marriage to the, the individualized marriage?
Yeah.
That functional shift feels critical. What's the difference?
Well, the companionate marriage, which was dominant for much of the 20th century, was based on shared roles, mutual dependency, and functional efficiency. Raising children, economic stability.
A partnership in the most practical sense.
Exactly. The individualized marriage, on the other hand, is based on the idea that the union must satisfy intense emotional, psychological, and personal fulfillment needs. It has to facilitate your personal growth and happiness.
That sounds like a much heavier burden for any relationship to have to carry.
It is. And when the union fails to meet those incredibly demanding emotional standards, it increasingly dissolves. This shift is the driving force behind the deinstitutionalization of marriage.
So marriage is no longer seen as a legal or economic necessity, first and foremost. It's become this intense, demanding, and ultimately disposable emotional contract if it doesn't deliver personal satisfaction.
And this instability is only exacerbated when people try to repartner after a first union dissolves.
Right. Second unions, remarriages, and stepfamilies are notoriously fragile.
Yeah.
They're often described as an incomplete institution.
Yes, that term is key.
So explain that concept. What makes it incomplete?
It lacks the clear behavioral norms, the scripts, and the rituals that guide first marriages. I mean, think about it. A first marriage has clear roles: husband, wife, co-parent. A stepfamily involves complex, ill-defined roles: stepmother, biological father, children from two different histories, maybe a new joint child. There are no widely accepted social norms guiding decisions on finances, discipline, holiday time, or even loyalty.
That lack of role clarity and established social support must create just immense friction.
It does. The result is that second unions are consistently more fragile than first marriages. They often dissolve within a shorter period of time, which just reinforces the risk profile of repartnering.
And cohabitation seems to be the preferred starting point for a lot of these second unions, even though cohabitation itself is statistically less stable than marriage.
That's right. Non-marital cohabitation is widespread now. It often serves as the normative first union, especially for younger cohorts. And while many cohabitations do convert to marriage, the unions themselves are inherently more fragile and have a shorter average duration than marriages.
Is that because of a lack of commitment, or is it about the legal framework?
It's a bit of both. Sociologically, the commitment level is often viewed as lower. It's a trial run, not opt-in arrangement. But the legal environment plays a role too. As cohabitation has become more legally regulated, providing more protections and rights to non-married partners,
It's kind of ironically weakened marriage.
it has inadvertently diminished some of the unique social and financial benefits that traditionally set marriage apart. And that just further reinforces its deinstitutionalization as the mandatory life structure.
And this accelerating fragility of unions is happening at the same time as a rapid acceleration in the pace of repartnering. People are getting back into the market faster than ever.
The data shows a significant acceleration across successive birth cohorts in Western societies. In countries like the UK, Norway, and the US, for women born between 1965 and 1974, something like 2/3 or more repartnered within just 5 years after their first union dissolved.
5 years is incredibly fast, especially given how complex you're saying second unions are.
It is, and this pace is noticeably faster in Northern Europe and the US compared to Southern and Eastern Europe, like Italy and Poland. It reflects different levels of institutional and social liberalization around partnership dissolution.
And the type of union they choose the second time around is overwhelmingly cohabitation, not direct remarriage.
Correct. The vast majority of second unions now begin as cohabitation across these regions. Direct remarriages are becoming less and less common across cohorts, and this suggests a strategic change in behavior after a relationship ends.
Does this speed and preference for cohabitation suggest a rush back to commitment, or the opposite, a heightened sense of caution?
The analysis suggests a hypothesis that women are actually becoming more careful when they repartner.
More careful.
After the failure of a first union, they're opting for the less formal, less legally and financially entangled option of cohabitation. It's like a rigorous testing phase for a potential partner to make sure the match is right before they enter into a fragile second marriage.
And the population of people re-entering the partnership market is way more diverse than it used to be.
Significantly so. If you look at the older cohort, born 1945-54, the women whose first union dissolved were predominantly those who had married directly. Now, in the youngest cohort, born 1965-74, the majority of women separating either cohabited before they got married or were separating from a co-residential partnership. This means they're bringing incredibly diverse experiences, expectations about commitment signals, and different motives into the market.
Whether they're looking for economic stability, reliable co-parenting, or just simple emotional connection.
Exactly. And the data confirms that those who previously cohabited tend to repartner faster than their counterparts who were married in their first union. The experience of cohabitation seems to normalize the fluidity of partnership status. They see it as a functional starting block, making the transition to a new union quicker. They favor speed and low formality over the weight of traditional commitment structures.
This cultural shift toward more fluid, individualized unions is so strongly connected to these profound changes in gender roles, particularly in the U.S. And that brings us to the gender revolution framework.
Right. This is a sociological theory that suggests the move toward egalitarian gender norms drives demographic change in two distinct phases. It tries to explain why, despite women's increasing educational and economic power, relationship stability initially just plummeted.
Okay, so phase one, the destabilization phase, that hinges on the conflict between public life and private life.
Exactly. You see women advancing significantly in the public sphere, getting higher education, high workforce participation, but they encounter persistent traditional behavior in the private sphere.
The men don't catch up at home.
Often, men do not immediately adapt their domestic expectations. And this discrepancy, this tension over domestic labor and partnership roles, it results in higher divorce rates and a decline in marriage formation.
So rising female power initially destabilizes the traditional model without fully replacing it with a stable, egalitarian one.
That's phase one. Phase two predicts that as the cultural shift matures, as institutions and families fully adapt and egalitarian norms become dominant, stability should return, leading to stable egalitarian partnerships. The big question is, did the U.S. actually follow this trajectory?
Let's look at divorce first. According to the theory, that should show an inverted U-shaped pattern.
And the findings for divorce are fully consistent with the framework. The association between rising egalitarian gender norms and divorce is a perfect inverted U-shape.
So it worked as predicted.
It did. Initial increases in egalitarianism were destabilizing. They caused divorce rates to rise when norms were highly traditional. But once egalitarian norms became established and dominant, the divorce rates declined. And this stabilization pattern was observed across all educational groups. Divorce instability was a universal social challenge.
But the story changes radically when we look at marriage formation. Did stability return across the board there too?
This is where the framework hits a fundamental snag in the U.S. context, and it leads to what's been termed the bifurcated family process.
Bifurcated. Split.
The predicted U-shaped relationship, that initial decline in marriage followed by a return to stability, it only applies to college-educated women.
So for highly educated women, the gender revolution is largely a success story.
Yes. For college-educated women, marriage rates initially dipped, but then they reversed. They started increasing as egalitarian norms became dominant. And at the highest levels of egalitarianism, college-educated women actually show a higher probability of marriage than their less educated counterparts. They are finding partners willing to share the domestic load and achieve this stable, modern, egalitarian ideal.
But for women without a college degree, the trajectory is devastatingly different.
For non-college-educated women, increases in egalitarian gender norms predicted a continuous, uninterrupted decline in marriage formation. No U-shape, no return to stability, and this stark divergence highlights a deep socioeconomic split in family formation outcomes in the U.S.
So why? Why does the egalitarian ideal only translate into stable unions for the college-educated? Why can't the non-college-educated achieve the stability that they might also desire?
It's the critical intersection of culture and economics, particularly in a liberal welfare state like the U.S. The cultural meaning of marriage has shifted. Marriage is still highly valued across all social classes. They still desire stability and commitment.
Right.
But disadvantaged Americans increasingly forego marriage because they feel they cannot meet the perceived financial prerequisites that are necessary for stability.
So there's this unspoken agreement that marriage requires a certain economic floor to stand on.
Exactly. The perception is that to have a stable marriage, you need two stable incomes, affordable housing, maybe a mortgage, and the ability to afford a wedding that signals that stability to your community.
And critically, with rising economic inequality.
And specifically, the erosion of good, secure jobs for low-educated men, it prevents these couples from securing the necessary financial resources to achieve that shared, stable, egalitarian life they culturally aspire to.
The decline in stable, well-paying, blue-collar jobs for men becomes a functional barrier to commitment.
It is a monumental barrier. The findings suggest that while the cultural desire for partnership shifted toward egalitarian ideals universally, only those with sufficient economic capital can actually realize this new ideal.
For those struggling with precarity, the rising economic barriers just prevent them from translating their egalitarian preferences into stable partnerships.
They're locked out. They're locked out of achieving the very stability that high-income couples now enjoy.
Which means the ability to commit is now strongly stratified by income and education. It makes the pursuit of authenticity, that costly signal of stability, financially impossible for vast segments of the population.
The search for a slow life history strategy partner is now limited by socioeconomic class. This is a profound social division, a stability gap that is defined by a college degree.
Okay, we've covered the micropsychology of attraction, the shifting institutions of commitment, and the economic stratification of partnership. To complete the picture, we have to dive into the profound cultural transformation of desire itself. And that brings us to the neosexual revolution.
Right. This is a term that describes a quieter but potentially more consequential cultural and social transformation of sexuality that's been unfolding since the 80s and 90s. It's fundamentally changing how we define desire, intimacy, and performance.
How does this neosexual model contrast with the old one, what the source calls paleosexuality?
Paleosexuality was the traditional model. It was centered primarily on the biological imperatives of the sex drive, achieving the orgasm, and the context of the heterosexual couple, largely tied to reproduction.
And neosexualities.
They are organized around gender difference, self-love, manufactured thrills, and prosthetic substitution.
The concept of banalization is key here, right?
Yes. Sexuality has lost its mystical, all-encompassing quality. It's no longer the grand metaphor for desire and happiness or the symbol of ultimate transgression. Because of its increasing visibility, fragmentation, and its association with negative outcomes like abuse, violence, shame, it's now often taken for granted, like mobility or egotism.
And this revolution is driven by processes of dissociation and fragmentation. What are the key separations happening here?
Well, historically, the first association was separating sex from reproduction, which was largely achieved through modern contraception. That allowed sex to become recreational.
Right.
But the neosexual revolution pushes further. It involves the separation of sexuality from gender relations, where gender difference itself becomes highly mutable and questioned.
And critically, the fragmentation of sexuality within the self.
This is the most complex point. The neosexual model involves separating the tender, unifying aspects of sexuality, what you might call the libido, from the aggressive, divisive aspects, the destrudo.
How did that happen?
It was driven by necessary public discourse on abuse and harassment. The focus shifted so heavily to the negative violence, power dynamics, that the perception of pure sexuality became culturally impure. It led to fear, shame, and guilt, often overshadowing joy and closeness in our interactions.
So this sociological pressure creates a really challenging environment for IRT, for intimate risk-taking. Because the act of physical connection is now so laden with potential danger and complexity, it makes vulnerability feel inherently unsafe.
It reinforces the impulse toward the defensive posture, even for people who are otherwise securely attached. And furthermore, this fragmentation aligns with the economic strategy of perpetual flexibilization, this societal pressure for everyone to be constantly adaptable, transitory, and modular, to avoid stable, rigid identities or commitments.
The modular self. The person who avoids commitment because they have to be constantly ready to pivot.
Precisely. This environment fosters what's been called lean sexuality, a term that references post-Fordian industrial strategies like lean management and self-sex, which alludes to self-service and self-control. This whole model emphasizes self-discipline and self-optimization. The goal is a highly functional, self-sufficient partner.
And this self-optimization ties directly back to self-presentation gameplay.
It does, through the lens of performance.
Yeah.
Irving Goffman's dramaturgical analysis, where life is a performance managed in the front region and prepared for in the back region, is more relevant now than ever.
So the modern impulse for self-sex and self-staging through meticulous dating profile, social media performance, public self-exposure, it's all fundamentally a narcissistic display.
The satisfaction is derived not just from physical arousal, but from the thrill of non-sexual self-exposure and self-invention. The performance is the pleasure in many of these modern interactions.
So you're constantly managing your impression to maintain an agreed-upon definition of the situation. You're often required to practice what's called artificial willed credulity.
The mutual agreement to overlook minor blunders or inconsistencies to keep the performance running smoothly. And this constant management runs completely counter to the effortless, low-maintenance safety that's signaled by true authenticity.
This brings us to the changing role of self-gratification within established partnerships.
Yeah, studies show a significant cultural shift here. Self-gratification, masturbation, it has shed its historical character as, an emergency relief measure or a substitute for a partner. It now coexists openly and peacefully alongside heterosexual activity in many satisfying relationships.
It's moved to a position of equality alongside intercourse.
Which is a powerful statement about the nature of the modern partnership. It reinforces the idea of the self-optimizing, self-sufficient partner who is capable of meeting their own needs. And while that might sound positive in terms of autonomy, it also subtly undercuts the deep mutual need and dependency that traditionally drove long-term pair bonding. The modular self is functionally and sexually self-contained. So what we've seen today is this deep and I think fascinating divergence in the dynamics of commitment. On the personal psychological level, the evidence is overwhelming. It's clear. Honesty, transparency, and the willingness to risk vulnerability. True authenticity, defined by high UOD and high IRT. That is the winning strategy for forming and sustaining high-quality long-term relationships.
Right. And game-playing strategic performance. While we can understand it, often as a defensive adaptation to rejection sensitivity, it ultimately just signals instability and pathology. It attracts partners who are prone to low commitment.
Absolutely. The psychological roadmap for success is transparency. It signals predictability and low relational maintenance cost.
However, when we zoom out to the societal level, we see that the very structures that support long-term commitment are themselves fracturing and becoming stratified. Marriage is increasingly selective, especially in the U.S., where egalitarian ideals benefit highly educated women, allowing them to form the stable unions they desire.
Yet, those same ideals, when they're coupled with rising economic barriers, leave less educated Americans facing this economic precarity that prevents them from securing the resources they need for the stability they also want.
And underneath all of this structural fracturing, you have the neosexual revolution. It means that desire, gender identity, and partnership roles are just continually being dissociated, fragmented, and redefined. The cultural wind is promoting this modular, self-optimized identity-lean sexuality and self-sex that fundamentally avoids the deep, messy commitment and vulnerability required for the kind of long-term relational success that the psychological data suggests people ultimately crave.
The high-value signal of authenticity remains the constant requirement for success. But the sociological and economic ground on which we are all trying to send that signal is shifting faster than ever.